Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our presentation this evening on Armchair Traveling Through Africa with Isabel Gomes, professional photographer Isabel Gomes. For all of you whom I have not had the pleasure to meet yet, my name is Nick DePasquale. I'm a photographer and photography instructor up here in the Northeast, just out about 35 miles northwest of Boston. And welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening. And all the folks whom I know, thanks very much for attending again. This is week 13 in our series, and it's been a pleasure to present these each week. So I'd like to introduce Isabel, tonight's guest speaker. And Isabel has been a professional photographer, along with her husband, Lawrence, for 25 years, and is the owner of Isabel Lawrence Photographers in Ventura, California. Isabel has a bachelor's degree in art from the University of Massachusetts Lowell, so locally, and attended the Brooks Institute of Photography in Santa Barbara, California. Isabel's photographs have been featured in many publications, including InStyle magazine, People, Town and Country, the Los Angeles Times travel section, as well as on the Oprah and Rachel Ray TV shows. Her work has also been exhibited in the Latino Art Museum in Long Beach, California, and Museum of Ventura County. Isabel has photographed an international ad campaign for Kodak and was also featured in their pavilion in Photokina in Cologne, Germany, the largest photo trade show in the world. She has also photographed many, many celebrities. So we really welcome Isabel tonight. I'll be monitoring the chat during the session, so everybody's microphones are on mute. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. And what I'll do is I'll monitor that, and I will ask at a break, I will ask Isabel the questions. So Isabel, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and really welcome from everybody virtually to this presentation tonight.
Hi, Nick. It's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me. So I thought I would start off talking about our gear and why we chose to bring this gear pretty much tailor-made to the particular trip that we took. So when you're traveling, I really urge you to really think ahead and try to envision what you're going to shoot, how you're going to shoot it, what's the best gear to bring, because you don't want to bring more stuff than you need. And in this particular case, we were very limited on our weight because we were taking small planes between the countries. So we couldn't bring everything that we own. So we did a lot of research. We really thought about what's the minimum that we can get away with while still having what we need to take great photos. So my husband and I, we were traveling together, and he shoots also. So between the two of us, we had the 3 Canon bodies. So we each had one, and then we had a backup. So I always urge when you're taking a trip like this to have at least one backup. It can really be invaluable, and it can really save your life. So then we chose to have a 24 to 70 millimeter lens, which is a little bit of a wider lens. So it's great for landscapes. Then a 70 to 200, which is kind of my go-to lens when I'm shooting a wedding. It's great for portraits, and I knew it would be great for wildlife. And then we wanted something a little bit longer, but we didn't want to, spend thousands of dollars on, this 100 to 400 millimeter. So we rented it, and that's something to consider too. If you can't afford, a really high-end camera, let's say, or a lens, or even if you're thinking of buying one, rent one first. Rent it for the weekend. Rent it on a trip and see how you like it. See if you like the weight of it, if you like the way it fits your hand. So instead of spending, $3,000, $4,000 on this lens, we rented it. And there are a lot of places online that you can, if there isn't a place near you where you can walk in and rent a camera or a lens, you can get them online, and they'll send them to you. And we had ours for 3 weeks. Cost us a couple $100, and it was great to have this lens. It really came in very handy. The other thing we had were these extenders. And for those of you not familiar with an extender, it's like a little tube that you attach between your camera body and your lens, and it amplifies the magnification. So it's great. So again, for wildlife, we knew we wanted to shoot wildlife, so we knew we wanted to have as much, amplification or zoom power as we could to get really close on these animals. The only kind of drawback to these extenders is I found it degraded the image a little bit. And you can see even in this photo here of these 2 tsessebes, the trees are a little bit kind of, you can see this is a little bit not quite super, not only sharp, but the pixels are a little bit weird. And that's from this extender. And I personally don't mind it. I mean, I came up shooting film, and film is never super sharp like digital. There's always a little bit of grain. So to me, this is perfectly acceptable. But if you're one of these photographers who likes everything super sharp and incredibly crisp and clear, either maybe forego the extender or maybe look into maybe a better quality extender. I think we spent a few $100 on each one, but there might be better optics out there. So consider that might be an issue you might have with extenders, but I personally was really great. I thought it was great to have these on the trip. The other kind of thing that saved us was this Olympus point and shoot. And ours, it's called the Olympus Tough point and shoot. And it's water resistant, it's dust resistant, it's shock proof. And because we knew we were going to Victoria Falls and it was going to be very wet, we didn't want to bring our EOSs, our really expensive cameras and lenses. We didn't want those to be damaged right off the bat. So that was a really great thing to have. And also we knew we were going to Namibia, where it's very dusty and very sandy. So again, that came in really handy there too. And that was not inexpensive. You can get those at Costco or Walmart. They're really great little cameras just to have anyway. You definitely want extra memory cards. We brought enough so that we didn't have to shoot over the ones that we already had. We shot them and then we put them away. As soon as they were done, we put them aside. We didn't have to go back and shoot over them because we didn't bring enough cards. And kind of a good thing to know about memory cards is they don't last forever. When we buy a memory card, I always write the date on the back, the month and the year. And after about 2 or 3 years, I start retiring those cards because they have a shelf life of about 2 to 3 years. So I take them out of the rotation of like a wedding or a major job, and I'll put them into like my personal stash of cards that I used to shoot my plants or my cat or something that if something goes wrong, it's not going to be catastrophic for me. So think about that and get the best quality memory card you can, because maybe you've experienced this, but you buy a memory card and you're shooting and the photo's kind of buffering. There's like this little thing that happens where you're fired and it doesn't quite kind of come together right away. That's not a fault of your camera. That's a fault of maybe not a great quality memory card. So invest in the best that you can and bring extras on a trip like this. And then the other must-have is a portable backup drive. And the brand that we have is called Nexto. And this is a very small device. It's not much bigger than a cell phone. It's about the length and width of a cell phone, but it's a little bit thicker. So very portable, very small, but you take your memory cards and you just stick them in there and it backs it up. So Larry and I were really diligent about backing up our cards, every night after we were shooting. And thank God we did that, because when I came home, I'm looking through the cards and I remember shooting these very particular photos and I couldn't find them anywhere. They weren't anywhere on our cards. So it turns out we actually lost a card somewhere along the way. And I was kind of freaking out and I was really panicking, but then I remembered, we stored everything on the Nexto, we backed everything up. So sure enough, I went in there and I found the photos. And yeah, you definitely want to have one of these for your trip. And then you want to think about, do you want to do some night photography, some dusk photography? If so, you're going to need a tripod. And this is a big, bulky item. Even, the newer ones that are made of much more lightweight material, they're still heavy and they still take up a lot of space. In fact, we had to get a bigger duffel bag than we had anticipated just to fit the tripod. But we only used it 2 nights, but it was worth it. So think about, if you think you're going to need a tripod, bring it. If you don't think you're going to use it, spare yourself the extra weight and the extra hassle of carrying it around. But you do want extra camera batteries. You do want an extra battery charger. Anything you think you can't get readily, because you can't just walk into a drugstore here in Africa where we were. So think about, am I going to be able to find these things when I'm there? And if not, have some extras on hand. And again, a small flashlight for night photography. And not just for night photography, but just kind of finding your way around an unfamiliar tent, let's say, like in Botswana, we couldn't figure out how to turn the lights on the first night. And so having that little flashlight really kind of helped us out. And a soft-sided backpack style camera bag. And ours are not very big, which was good because, when you have a big bag, you feel like you have to fill it. So having, a fairly smallish, and I'll show you, there's some pictures of it, of the actual bag, you'll see. Having a bag that wasn't super big, we didn't feel compelled to fill it with a bunch of stuff. We just filled it with the stuff that we really needed. And one thing I forgot to add on here, but that's also super important, is to have a journal, just something you can take notes in. I made lists of the birds that we saw that day, or the animals, the people we met, places I wanted to remember, because you think you're going to remember everything about this trip, but you won't. So keep a little journal, just something portable you can keep in your pocket. and just kind of take notes as you go along. So if you have a little extra room, an off-camera flash is a great thing to have. You can use it to do some really cool, lighting off parts of a landscape, or if you're doing portraits and you want a little fill flash. If you have the room, they're not very big. They don't take up a lot of room, so pack one. If you're not familiar with using a flash and it's not something that's part of your normal repertoire, skip it. Save the space for something that you really do need, like a Nexto or a lens that you might like. And of course, extra flash batteries. So the things I would recommend skipping are the monopod. We did bring a monopod and we never used it, and the bean bag. So when I was researching this trip, everywhere I read, it said you have to have a bean bag to stabilize your long lens in these Jeeps. You have to have a bean bag, you have to have a bean bag. So I'm telling Larry, we have to have a bean bag. And luckily he talked me out of it. He talked me off the bean bag ledge. He said, no, we don't have a bean bag. We're not gonna carry a bean bag, no on the bean bag. And thank God I listened to him, because a lot of the lodges have bean bags that you can use. And even when I did try to use the bean bag that they had, it seemed like it was never in the right place, because they have these little pedestals that you rest the bean bag on, and you Velcro it on there so it doesn't fall off. And it was just weird and cumbersome, and I never found it to be helpful. But what was helpful was we brought a canvas backpack that we were just going to use to carry stuff. And so we would just shove our jackets and our scarves or whatever we weren't wearing at the time into that canvas backpack, put that on the edge of the Jeep, and use that to stabilize our lens. So that worked great, and that didn't require any expense, first of all, of buying a bean bag or carrying it or anything like that. So I would say skip those two things. And plus, it's really kind of bright out there when you're shooting on these game drives, unless it's at night, and then even then the bean bag wouldn't help you. So I didn't find that was really a problem, hand holding a long lens while shooting the wildlife. So that's what I would skip. So then what do you pack for a trip like this? And we went to several countries. We went to Zimbabwe, we went to Botswana, Namibia, and then to Cape Town. And so, and again, we had to keep a really small bag because of the weight restrictions on the planes, and it had to be soft-sided. So we got 2 soft-sided duffel bags from Patagonia, and they're water resistant, they're roomy, they have little pockets inside, and they're brightly colored, so we could easily pick out our bags, on the tarmac or on the side of the plane there. So those were great. Although if I were to do it again, they make those with wheels. There's like a little metal frame and little wheels come out. I would get those. And the reason why I didn't get those is because I wasn't sure if that was considered a soft side because it had that metal frame. But it would have been great to be able to kind of wheel those bags around. And then a couple of pairs of quick drying pants, which we got at REI. A few t-shirts, and you can do laundry at these lodges. They offer a laundry service, so don't feel like you have to bring a bunch of stuff, because you can have things laundered there. A couple of long sleeve shirts for to protect you from the sun, and then a lightweight warm jacket with a hood, which we also got at Patagonia. We got the nano puffs, so they're very lightweight, but they're extremely warm, and with a hood, because it's very chilly in the morning when you're going on these game drives. You're in an open Jeep, the Jeep is moving fairly quickly, there's a lot of wind, so it got pretty chilly. And also a lightweight scarf. We didn't have gloves. I wish we had. If we were to do it again, pack some gloves, a sun hat, sunglasses, extra pair of reading glasses. I don't suggest you buy extra sunglasses or bring extra sunglasses, because you can buy glasses in any of the gift shops in the lodges. But I didn't see any reading glasses, so bring extras of those. And then, like I mentioned, a canvas backpack and sturdy but lightweight waterproof hiking boots. And even though most of the time you're going to be in a Jeep, there are instances, or there could be instances, where you have to get out of the Jeep, and I'll explain that a little bit later as we go along.
Isabel, we have a question
Okay.
from Kathy W. As a photographer, can you describe your process for deciding on your travel itinerary and destinations for this trip? And also, where do you wish you had gone but didn't have time to visit?
Oh, that's a great question. So yes, well, our main emphasis for this trip was to go to Namibia. I mean, we always wanted to go there. That was kind of the starting point. So I started doing a lot of research, prior to this trip, like figuring out where to go, when should we go, what countries should we visit. And I started to get really kind of overwhelmed and confused, and because I just didn't really know logistically what was possible. So a friend of mine turned me on to this travel agent, and she said, you should really talk to him. He does a lot of Africa trips. Talk to him. He did my trip, and I had a great time. So we explained to him what we wanted to do. And he put together this amazing trip for us. And he even suggested places that we normally, it wasn't on our radar. Like Cape Town was not on our radar. We wanted to do Victoria Falls, we wanted to do a safari, we wanted to do Namibia, and we thought we wanted to do much more safari than we ended up needing to do. So he talked us out of that third day of safari and talked us into adding on Cape Town instead, which I'm super glad that he did, because Cape Town is an incredibly beautiful city. And if it were up to us, we would have just skipped it. And so what I wish we had done is I wish we did have spent a little more time in Namibia. So that I wish we had done. But I'm very glad that we listened to our travel agent and that he guided us, out of the third camp. We did 2 camps in Botswana. I'm glad he talked us out of doing the 3 that we originally were going to do and add that on to Namibia. But what I do wish about Botswana is I wish we had done a little bit of a different camp. The 2 camps we went to were very similar. In fact, they're owned by the same family. So the terrain was somewhat similar. The animals we saw were somewhat similar. Everything was just kind of an extension of the first one. So I do wish we had done something a little bit different, whether something on water, or we met a couple who their lodge was up on a tree on some stilts or something. Like I kind of wish we had done something a little bit different there. But other than that, the trip was pretty perfect. And he made some great suggestions, and I highly recommend that you do hire a travel agent for this. In fact, I won't even go to the dry cleaners now without a travel agent. There's no reason to never not use a travel agent. They don't charge you anything. They can get you great rates. They can turn you on to things that you hadn't maybe considered. So yes, I would really, really recommend you do that. And did I answer the question? I know I went off on a little bit of a tangent.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, good. So one thing, before you even get on the plane, I want you to really think about what do I want to do with these photos when I get home? And I want to implore you to not just leave your images on your phone or on your memory cards. I really want you to print these and have a tangible item at the end of your trip. So whether that's a photo album, or a slideshow even, or prints for your wall, think about what you want to do before you even go. Because if you have, a big expanse over your mantle that you want to do a beautiful print for, now you're kind of thinking when you're on vacation, I should maybe shoot some panoramics to really fit that space. Or maybe you have a long, skinny vertical space in a hallway you want to fill. So now you're thinking vertical shots, or you're thinking a series of photos that would look great in a column, that long, skinny column. Or if you're doing a photo book or an album, you want photos that kind of support the facing pages. You want to think of your photos, how are they going to look opposite each other in a book? Do you want to do a little detail on one side, on one page, and then a big, more overview on the other page, so that there's a little balance and a narrative there? Or if you're doing a slideshow, think about doing some video. Shoot a little video on your phone and weave that into your slideshow, because that will tell just a really well-rounded, beautiful story. And I want to share with you, Nick, some of my favorite vendors for these things. And I want to just let you know I'm not endorsing, I'm not paid by these people. These are just, resources that I love to use, that I've had really good success with, that I'd like to share with you. And they're easy to use. So Image Source is a printer, and we're so lucky that they're here in Ventura. They're actually here. You can actually walk in and have your prints made. But even if you're not in Ventura, you can upload your photos and they will print them for you and they will ship them to you. And what's so great about them is, first of all, they print on any kind of surface, whether it's wood, metal, canvas, beautiful, beautiful images. I've never had to bring anything back because the colors were wrong or that it was printed incorrectly. The staff is amazing. The product is amazing. I highly, highly recommend them. And then for books, I go between Blurb and Artifact Uprising. And the prices are about the same. They just have a little bit different looks. I think what I like a little bit more about Blurb is you have more options as far as layouts. It's all drag and drop. So you just kind of drag it in there and you create your layouts. But Blurb has a little bit more variety. And they also have a magazine feature, which is really fun. So I thought it'd be really fun to do like a National Geographic riff on your vacation. So think about that. Have these things in mind before you even go. So now when you're shooting, you're kind of thinking, oh, this would make a great opening or transition shot. This would be great for my slideshow. And speaking of slideshows, what I use is Animoto. And again, this is very easy, all drag and drop. They have a free version with royalty-free music, lots of templates, lots of kind of cool little gadgets, and you can upload video with your film, with your stills, and make a great slideshow that you can download and share with all your family.
We have another question from John, Isabel.
Okay.
And what was the total length of your trip?
It was about 3 weeks. Yeah, it was a nice long trip. It was fabulous. So the first place we went to, actually, I'm going to take a sip of my gin and tonic. If you hear ice clinking, that's my gin and tonic. Getting to the sundowner spirit. So the first place we went to was Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe was great. And right when our driver picked us up from the airport, we're driving to our hotel, and we see all kinds of wildlife on the side of the road. We saw like a family of baboons. We saw impala just like cruising down the side of the road. It was incredible. And but the one weird thing about Zimbabwe we didn't realize is, I guess the country's bankrupt. So our concierge told us, don't even try to go to a bank and draw money because there isn't any. So Larry and I we brought bills, some cash, because they do take American dollars there, but we brought 20s, and we figuring we can always make change for cabs or whatever, but you couldn't make change anywhere. So the concierge, one night, she did break a 20 for us reluctantly. She let us know in a very friendly way she wasn't going to do that again. And then the only other time we were able to break some money was at a gallery where we bought some postcards. So if you go, make sure you bring some small denominations to tip cab drivers or whatever you might be doing, so you don't run out of your bills. So here we are at Victoria Falls, and we had been told it was going to be very wet and to not bring our cameras, and they give you like a big rain poncho when you get there. And when we got there, we see it's misty. It looks like this, it's misty, but the sun's out. We're like, okay, the whole warning of the wetness seems a little bit overblown, but okay, we'll go with it. But even though we went in May also, and the reason why we went in May, Nick, to Africa was because we had booked a wedding in Washington, D.C. And so we figured, well, and the flights to Johannesburg leave out of Washington, D.C., and they live out of New York. So we figured, okay, we're already going to be in D.C. That eliminates that 6-hour flight, and then we just have to deal with a 12-hour flight from D.C. to Africa. So we went in May, and May actually turned out to be a great time of year to go because it was fairly dry. Like their seasons are opposite ours. So our spring is their fall. So it was dry. There weren't many mosquitoes, even though we took malaria pills with us and took them. I didn't see a single mosquito, hardly any flies, no spiders. I mean, there was like nothing. And there weren't very many tourists, and the weather was really great. So it was a really good time to go, except for Victoria Falls. So apparently there's so much water there at this time of year that it's hard to actually see the falls. Like you can't really see the structure of it. You just saw a lot of mist and a lot of this basically. Like there was never one vantage point where you could see the entire falls. And like Niagara Falls or Iguazu in Argentina, when you get there and you see that typical horseshoe shape with the water falling, like what you expect to see in a waterfall. So this is what we saw. So it was great. And so we're wandering around, and we're carrying our rain slicker, and we're like, why are we carrying this thing? And then we round a corner and we get this. So this looks like rain, but it's not actually rain. It's the precipitation kind of blowing off the falls. And yes, lo and behold, we did get completely drenched, and we were so glad we didn't have our Canons with us and our really expensive lenses to get soaked. So I shot all of these with that little Olympus tough camera, and I did sneak my phone out now and again really quickly, and then I would toss it back in my pocket. And this is kind of like the raindrops hitting the lens of the camera, and it got a little bit foggy, which I really love. I think this looks like a pastel painting. So I really kind of liked that effect. I bet if I tried to recreate it, I probably couldn't, but I was really happy with how that turned out. Oh, and you see this little string right here? This is where you can go bungee jumping when you go. So make sure you leave room for that in your itinerary. And this bridge, if you walk across this bridge, you'll end up in Zambia. So the next night we went on a river cruise in the Zambezi, and it was really fun, and we met some really cool people, and we shot some wildlife. We shot this hippo and her little baby. Here's the little baby's ears right there. I'm shooting, just kind of shooting around the boat, and I have my long lens on. And for those of you might have experienced this, when you travel with a long lens, people just assume you're a good photographer. Like they see that lens and they think, wow, this person must be really great. So this lady came up to me and she said, "Oh, are you a professional photographer?" And I said, "Well, I'm a professional portrait photographer, but I'm not a professional, wildlife or landscape photographer." And she says, "Well, I have to show you the photos that I took yesterday." So she shows me these photos on the back of her camera. And she has just like the entire frame is just filled with elephants, baby elephants, mother elephants, male elephants. I mean, just amazing photo after photo after photo she's showing me of all these elephants. So I asked her, how did this happen? Where did you see this? So she said, "Well, last night my husband and I went to this thing called the Seduli Hide. And it's like this man-made structure that looks like a mound of dirt. And you go in there, it's got an opening and it overlooks this watering hole. And apparently it's like a freeway for elephants. It's just this amazing place." So kind of a good thing to think about when you're traveling is not only get intel from the guides and the locals, but really chat up the locals or the other tourists. Because as much research as you might do, there's always something you're going to miss. So it's great to be friendly, and having that lens and that equipment is almost like a little invitation to people to kind of approach and for you to approach them. You have something in common, you're both there as photographers. So utilize that aspect when you're traveling. So I run over to my husband and I say, "Larry, we have to check out this Seduli Hide. This is going to be great." So we go to our concierge and she says, "Oh, I know exactly what that is. I'm going to hook you up for tomorrow night. I'm going to make an appointment. The guide's going to come and pick you up." So he did. So he picked us up and he parked the Jeep. He couldn't get the Jeep too close to the hide. So we had to walk from the Jeep to the hide. And it wasn't that long of a walk. But because we were walking, he had to be armed. And honestly, I think that rifle is just more to create drama. And it's like a cool experience because we walked to this very flat, open area. So it's not like an animal was going to pounce out of nowhere, but it did create for a really kind of cool start to the experience. So that's the hide. That's Larry with our guide. And we can only be there for an hour. So it's an hour before sunset. He brings you in, but then you have to leave because it gets dark and you don't want to be walking around in the bush here at night. So we're in there. We've got our long lens. Larry's got his 400 millimeter lens. We're ready. We're poised. We're just waiting for this massive amount of elephants to kind of come through. And for the first 45 minutes, all we see is this. So just this dude, and that's all he's doing the entire time. He's not even moving around. He's just standing there like that for 45 minutes. And we're thinking, oh my God, this is, please, something show up here. So off in the distance, we see a little bit of dust. And then finally we get at least this guy. So he comes shuffling along and you can see how close he gets. I mean, he was so close to us, we could hear him nibbling the grass and ripping it out of the ground. We could hear him kind of grunting and snorting. And the light's getting really beautiful now. It's getting really low and directional. It's raking across his beautiful, weathered, furry body. But now it's just about time to go. The hour is up and we can see the guide looking at his watch and looking at us and looking at his watch and looking at us. And Larry and I are pretending we're not seeing that he's looking at his watch. We're just pretending like, okay, maybe if we don't actually look at him, he won't make us leave. But we had to go. So we start packing up our gear. We're starting to kind of put stuff away and shuffle stuff away. And then all of a sudden, this guy just like appeared out of nowhere. We didn't even hear him approach. He was just there. And so we saw this beautiful young male elephant, and he's there drinking. And so now Larry and I are super excited. We grab our cameras back out of the bags and we start shooting. And when you're shooting, you kind of hear that click, 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 and you hear that beep, 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 beep of the focus and the shutter. Well, he started to hear that. So if you look at his face, you can see that his eyes are really small, which indicates that he probably doesn't have very good eyesight. But he has very large ears, which indicates that he can hear really well. And he has a long nose, which means he can smell really well. But fortunately, the wind was blowing against us, so he couldn't smell us. If he had smelled us, he would have hightailed it out of there. All he could do was hear that beeping, and that piqued his curiosity. So he just kind of kept getting closer and closer. And at this point, we could have reached out and touched his trunk. He was that close to the opening of that hide. So just goes to show, when you're traveling to a place like this, you can't have a lot of expectations. You have to just kind of go with what's presented to you, enjoy it, seize the moment. And then when you do, if something does come together for you, just be prepared and embrace it and have a great time. But honestly, even if this elephant had never shown up, just being in that hide for 45 minutes with the ranger would have been worth it. We got to ask him all kinds of questions about what it's like to be a ranger. He told us it's a very rigorous training to become one. It's very expensive. They have to be trained in firearms and, of course, uh, almost like animal husbandry. They have to know everything about the flora, the fauna, the animals, the terrain, politics. There's anything you can't ask him that he can't answer you. And they have to renew their license every 1 or 2 years, which is very expensive. So it's just interesting to have access to him for that long and to be able to talk to him. So this is the first of several small plane rides we're going to take. And this was the largest of all of the planes we took. This was a 10-seater. And then we took a 4-seater and a 2-seater. And these are our pilots. And our pilots were all really young and all really cute. They all looked like made-for-TV pilots. Like each one was like cuter than the one before. And we found out that the reason why they're so young is this is kind of their training ground. They log their hours doing these short flights back and forth, but they can put in like 60 or 70 hours a week flying. So they get a really good training. And of course, in these small planes, there's a lot of, things they have to deal with as far as wind and navigating. And it's just a really good training ground for them. So it was really interesting to kind of learn that aspect of it as well. And that's Graham. That's our other super cute pilot. And you can see that he's also the bag porter. He's the stewardess. He provides the entertainment, the drinks. He gives you tour advice while we're flying. I mean, these guys do everything, and they do it cheerfully, and they do it beautifully. And these are the bags. So these are our Patagonia bags. We had our clothes in there, and we had our camera bags in the little soft-sided backpacks. And it was so nice to be able to see the terrain from above. It was just an unexpected delight to get to see this aspect of Botswana. And when I saw this watering hole, the light just kind of raked across it and created this heart. I just felt like, yeah, this was like a really kind of special gift, and I was so privileged and honored to be able to see this. And of course, you can see some wildlife from above. Wherever there's water, the animals are going to congregate. But unfortunately, they have had a lot of fires lately, and we found out they haven't had significant rainfall since 2013. So a lot of wildfires are popping up. The animals are having to migrate longer and longer distances to find water, and they're perishing along the way. I spoke to a woman in one of the airports who was at another camp, and she said they were without water for 2 days because some elephants had gotten into the camp and knocked down the water tower looking for water. So they're desperate, and it's becoming a little bit of a serious situation. In fact, the manager of Pom Pom Camp, one of the camps we went to, he and I have been emailing each other, fairly often over the months since we've been there. And he always ends the email with praying for rain. And that's the airstrip. So you have basically an airstrip, one main road, a couple of little arbitrary or ancillary roads, and you can see there's nothing out there. There are no cell phone towers, there are no telephone poles, no electricity. Everything they do is either wind generated, solar generated, or with, either wind or solar generated. Yeah, all generators. So, and the level of service they provide at these camps is just incredible that they're able to do that with such limited kind of resources around them. So this is Pom Pom Camp. Incredible, beautiful place, incredibly warm, friendly people. And this was our tent. Very luxurious. This bed was so comfortable. I can tell you it rivaled some of the nicest beds that I've ever slept in some of the nicest hotels. And we had our own little bathroom area. And this is why we couldn't figure out how to turn on the light. There are no walls, right? No walls, so there are no plugs really. So the light is here. You see this little dark thing? So on our first night, we get back to the camp, we had no idea how to turn the light on. So thank God we had that little flashlight so we could at least brush our teeth and wash our faces. So what happens is when you get there, you're assigned a driver and you're assigned 6 people to a Jeep, and you stay with that driver and tracker, and you stay with those 6 people the entire time. And so you can't wander around camp at night by yourself because it's dangerous. There are animals there. So if you need to leave the camp, they give you like an air horn. So you blow the air horn if there's an emergency, and they will come and get you or help you. So And then in the morning, they come and wake you up at 6 a.m. to get you ready for the morning drive. You do 2 drives, one in the morning and then one in late afternoon and into the evening. The swimming pool, it was a little bit too chilly for us to swim, but they had these beautiful grounds. And this is Odie, our guide. So it was Odie, the guide, and Clifford, the tracker. And we were so incredibly fortunate to have Odie as our guide. And on these safaris, the guide can kind of make or break your experience, unfortunately. And in contrast to another guide we had, which was also very good, we realized just how exemplary Odie was. And what he would do is he had the uncanny ability of putting us not only where there was a lot of wildlife, but where the light was perfect on the wildlife and where the backdrop was perfect for the wildlife. So he just, if he's not a photographer, he has the eye and the soul of a photographer. He just always knew where to put us for the best possible photos. And we were just so blessed to have him as our guide. And the African buffalo, a beautiful animal, but extremely dangerous. The only animal that the guides are very wary of. We never got too close to these guys. They're very unpredictable. They can charge the jeeps, and especially when there are babies, which there were in this case, which they always kind of keep in the middle of the herd. And everywhere we went, we could see, the fire, the evidence of the fire. In fact, there were 2 wildfires going on either side of our camp. And the first night we were in our tent, it was really windy. It was really smoky, and we had just experienced the Thomas fires here in California. So the smell of that smoke was really upsetting. Like, it was really kind of bringing up a lot of kind of bad memories. So I had a very sleepless night. And also the impala were mating. It's mating season for the impala, and they sound just crazy. They make the loudest, weirdest noise you've ever heard in your entire life. And on top of all that, so I'm lying there listening to all this and feeling this wind and this heat, thinking any second now they're going to knock on our tent and say we have to evacuate. Then I hear a lion going like harumph, like I can hear him kind of vocalizing outside the tent. So I'm like, oh dear Lord, this is going to be the beginning and the end of this trip for me. But luckily we made it, we survived the night, and we went on to have a really great time. And the landscape in Botswana is just beautiful. And this tree here, this beautiful boab tree, so the trunk is hollow. And these trees can be many, many, many hundreds of years old. And the trunk stores the water. So because it's so dry here, they have like this reservoir of water that they kind of suck up into the middle of the trunk that they kind of utilize during the course of the dry season. And the sunsets were extraordinary, just to see, everything bathed in this incredible orange light. And did you know that when a baby zebra is born, the mother zebra keeps her close to her for several hours because she wants the baby to memorize the mother's stripes so she won't lose her in the herd. And just beautiful, beautiful sunsets, open skies, just clear. Well, actually there was a little bit of smoke, which added to a nice kind of little haziness, but beautiful, just incredible. And then the next morning, we were maybe in the Jeep for 10 minutes when we see this scene. So this baby is suckling the mother, and we were told that that only happens for about 2 years, or until the baby's tusks become so long that they're unable to kind of reach the mother. So this baby is kind of like at the end days of his free lunch. And that's the impala. So you see this thing, you think, oh, what a cute, delicate, sweet little animal. This thing sounds like a 500-pound pig being stabbed to death in the middle of the night. And that's our dream team. So this was our group of friends that we were with. So on the far left is Clifford, our tracker, then Odie, our guide, and then Phil and Cheryl from Australia, and Marion and Franz from Germany, who I think are tuned in. I think they stayed up late to hear this. So hi, Marion and Franz, if you're there. And then of course, our friend, my husband, who's also my friend, Larry. But we had such a great time. It was such a great group. We all laughed together. We got each other's jokes. We were really good. If somebody wanted to stop, the other person, nobody was impatient. And that's another thing to kind of consider when you go on these drives, and maybe you're with people who you don't know. If you want to see something, you tell the driver, oh, can you please stop? I'd like to photograph this. And they'll almost always stop. And it might not necessarily be what you want to stop for, but I kind of urge you or encourage you to try to think creatively in those moments. Like maybe look at the way the trees are outlined in the sky, or maybe look down. You might see, remnants of an antelope horn or some footprints or something that you can photograph. So even if what they've stopped for doesn't interest you, just kind of look around and expand your view a little bit and think, oh, what can I make that suits me? What kind of photograph can I create that's interesting to me, even though it's not necessarily what we stopped for? And so they have this wonderful tradition called the sundowner, where you are served your favorite type of drink, and they bring out little appetizers, and they find this beautiful open field where they can keep an eye on all directions so nothing kind of sneaks up on you when you're out there. And you just enjoy the sunset and enjoy each other. It's a really, really lovely tradition. And so this is one of those instances where somebody wanted to stop to photograph the crocodile. And I personally I don't know, I mean, I guess they're cool and they're beautiful and whatever, but it's not an animal that I really gravitate and would want to photograph. But I thought, okay, well, I'm here, let me make the best of the situation. What can I photograph that might be of interest to me? So I decided to just kind of focus on body parts and try to make it a little bit more of a graphic design element rather than just shoot, another picture of a crocodile. And then I encourage you to not only do close-ups of animals, but think of the landscape. Think of them in their environment. And also, this is good if you are putting together a photo book, because you want to have some variety in the angles that you show. You want to take the viewer on a little bit of a journey visually. So where you might have a close-up of the wildebeest on the left-hand side of your book, on the right, maybe you want to show his environment. Where does he live? What's going on around him? And I just have to say, I think the wildebeest is probably my favorite animal of all. He's just so oddly, weirdly beautiful. He has these really skinny little legs, this big fat body, this woolly head. Like, none of the parts should go together, but yet I think they just look so adorable together. And here is the termite mound, also known as the bush bathroom. And these things are all over the place. And you could do an entire series of just termite mounds because they're all different. They look like modern sculpture. I mean, they're just so cool. And they're often attached to trees. And when I saw that, and the termite mound itself is made out of a secretion that the termite makes. I don't know if it comes from the front end or the back end, but it's making some kind of secretion that's creating this thing. And they're almost always attached to trees. So I figured, well, the termite must come out of the tree, start doing its thing, create this mound, and then, maybe the tree eventually perishes because this thing is sucking the life out of the tree. So I asked Odie about it, and he said, no, it's quite the opposite. The trees actually grow from the termite mound because there's so many nutrients there. So it's a symbiotic relationship. The tree actually benefits from being near these termite mounds. And kind of one of the challenges of photographing animals, in the wild like this, is trying to separate them from the background. Animals are designed to be camouflaged. They don't want to be seen by prey and by other animals. So when you get an opportunity to photograph one against a clean, clear backdrop like this, take it. It's a great thing. And also be ready to show action, show them in motion. So, you have to kind of keep that camera up to your eye the whole time. Even if you don't think something's going to happen, something kind of wonderful might happen. So always be ready. And we saw the rhino, which is for an animal that's so big, it's actually kind of elusive and hard to see. And there's a white rhino and a black rhino. And Nick, do you know the difference between a white rhino and a black rhino?
I was going to say one is white and one is black, but I think that'd be too simple.
No, it's not. I actually don't know, but I know it has something to do with their lips. It's something to do with their lips. Either one has a lip that comes out and one has a lip that goes down.
Actually, we have somebody watching who may know the answer. So Alona, if you know the answer, please type in the chat.
Yeah, type it in. I think it's something to do with their lips, but it's not their color. And then the birds are incredible. And these are kind of like the trash collectors, I guess, of this area. Because first you have when there's prey that has gone down, of course, first there's the animal that took down the prey, the cats, the big prey. And then the hyenas kind of come in and they do a little bit of a cleanup. And then when the hyenas are done, the vultures come in and finish the job. So they pick everything clean. So they provide a very useful service. But if you're a birder, the birds in Botswana are unbelievable. In fact, I think 10% of all the bird population in the world resides in Southern Africa. I mean, they're incredible.
So we have I'm sorry to interrupt. We have, Brian said that the black rhino has a pointy lip.
Mm-hmm.
So that one
Okay.
is, so that one's a white rhino.
Yep, that's a white rhino. I knew something to do with the lips. So the African fish eagles, also, you know, beautiful and fairly plentiful. We saw a lot of them, and they similar to our eagles, our American bald eagles. And this is my favorite bird. This is the scarlet-breasted roller. I mean, have you ever seen a cuter bird in your entire life? I'm going to guess you have not. And when he flies, his wings are very iridescent, so you get this beautiful turquoise flash through the sky. He's just absolutely incredible. This beautiful crane. And so we see this guy, and he's big. He's like the size of a mid-sized dog, and he's actually the largest or the heaviest bird that can fly. So he can weigh about 30 pounds. So when we saw him, I asked our guide, "Oh my God, what is that? What is that bird?" And he says, "Oh, that's Corey's bastard." I'm like, "I'm sorry, what now?" He said, "Yeah, that's Corey's bastard." And I'm like, "Are you sure that's the name?" Yeah, it's Corey's bastard. So I'm thinking, okay, that's kind of weird. So when we go back to our tent, I look him up in my bird book, and it's actually Corey's bustard. But as I'm reading, it turns out this guy is kind of a love him and leave him kind of dude. So he mates with a lot of different females, and then he just takes off. So as it turns out, our guide was right. He is a bit of a bastard. And we had another really great sighting, these African dogs, wild dogs, and they're very rare. And in fact, they're on the extinct list, I believe. There are only 6,000 of them left. So it was really amazing to get to see them. We saw a pack of them, and these youngsters had just fed. In fact, when we first saw them, they had blood on their snout from what they were eating. And now they were just kind of playing with some of the sinew. And all of the markings are completely unique to each dog. They're all different. And they're very effective and very brutal hunters. They hunt in packs, and they will eviscerate and kill or eat the prey alive. So they're kind of rough dudes, but they're incredibly beautiful. And of course, we saw, you know, hippos, lots of hippos everywhere. And these birds sitting on top of their heads there, they're called red-billed oxpeckers. And you see them a lot on animals. You'll see them on rhinos and on giraffes. And what they do is if an animal has a wound, they will pick the bacteria and the like whatever is in there infesting the wound, they'll pick it out, so they'll clean it, which is great because they clean the wound, but is not so great because of the constant pecking, the wound never really closes. And this, I forget what this is called, but this is their version of wacky tobacco. So apparently the stem of this is hollow, and you can just light it up, smoke it, and have yourself a good old time. And this photo to me really kind of epitomizes the water situation there, or the lack of. This would normally be a river. This would be filled with water. And now it's just like puddles here and there. And in fact, we would see catfish just kind of flopping in like what was like 1 or 2 inches of water. It was very sobering and very, really brought home, you know, just exactly what's going on everywhere in the world, but especially here in Botswana with the weather. And then we did finally get to see some baby elephants. In fact, these 2 little guys were just a few weeks old, and these are all females. The females kind of pack together, they travel together, and they all assume responsibility for the babies. You know, they all help each other, they all take care of each other. They're just extraordinary animals. And this is interesting. This is a weaver bird nest. And weaver birds are so smart. They create faux nests. So there's only one real nest here. The other ones are decoys to throw off predators. And you notice they build their nests on these really thorny trees. So they're doing everything they can to kind of ward off anything that might interfere with their babies in their nests. A beautiful zebra. Oh, this was a really rare and interesting sighting. This is a pangolin, and I'd never heard of a pangolin, and I'm a pretty big animal lover and buff. But this is like a spiny anteater. And if you would just walk by him and think you're looking at like a pod or something. He wrapped himself around this tree, and he was so well camouflaged. And apparently he's the most traded animal in the world. Like, I guess people, I don't know if they eat him or if it's an aphrodisiac, but they're very sought after for that purpose, unfortunately. So they're becoming very extinct and very rare. And our friends, Marion and Franz, in this case, they were in another Jeep because this is a different camp, and they got to see him walking around. And Marion said she even got to pet him. And while his skin looks like armor, like really tough, she said he felt very feathery.
Isabel, we have a question, and
Yep.
actually this picture is a good example. So
Okay.
Deb was asking, how do you decide which images you're going to take in black and white versus color?
That is a good question. I mean, if it were me, I would probably turn everything into black and white. I really love black and white photography. I think if I really want to focus in on the subject and not be distracted by the background, then I'm going to go more towards black and white. Or if I want to create more of like a graphic image, like I did with that zebra, like I want to just focus on the striping pattern. So it's really a question of like maybe a design element or a distractionary element. Like maybe there was something in the scene that I thought the color just was too jarring and your eye was going to it rather than to the lion. So that's usually what's making me decide to turn something into black and white. Or if I want it to look like an old photo, like I just want it to look like something that could have been shot, in the 1800s. So in this image, I didn't show what had happened before this lion went to sleep because it's very graphic. And let's just say a giraffe was not having a good day. So we came upon this three females, three lionesses, and they had just fed on the giraffe, and now they were just satiated and just kind of lying around. And they could not have. We could have walked out of the Jeep and gone and rubbed their bellies. They could not have been least interested in us. They had just fed. They were happy. They were sleepy. They'd had a very good day as opposed to that poor giraffe. But then the next day we had a very lovely positive experience with lions. So the morning of this hike, of this drive, or this afternoon rather, we hadn't really seen much wildlife. We were just kind of driving around and we didn't really see anything. We're thinking, oh, this might be a bit of a bust today. But then Odie got a call, via the radio from another guide, because they'll trade information with each other. They'll share animals that they've spotted, and they'll kind of guide each other to kind of bring everybody around to where there's something to see. So he got the intel that there was these three cubs kind of out in this field, but he had to drive over this very kind of muddy and rocky terrain to get there. But we finally get there, and here are these three beauties just waiting to be photographed. I mean, they're just in the perfect light. They're just lying there perfectly posed. We were able to get fairly close to them and just get some really great photos. And I want to point out, you see these little markings on the backs of their ears? See how they're all a little bit different? That's how the mother can identify which cub is which when they're walking in the tall grass. So as long as she can see the tips of their ears, she knows who's who. And we were just able to make like this great eye contact with them. I mean, they were just looking at us. They weren't the least bit afraid of us. They were just enjoying kind of being out there in the late afternoon sun. And then Mom comes along. So we got these really just lovely images of her cuddling with her cubs. And I love this one because it looks like the baby's tail is in her mouth. I think it's probably under her chin, but it's just so cute. I can't even stand it. So I had a ton of lion cub pictures, and my husband made me take them all out. So this is the only ones you have.
We have a question from John for you.
Okay.
Can drones be used in Africa?
No, I don't think so. I didn't see anybody using them. I doubt it. I don't know. But I kind of doubt it. They really want you to be as unobtrusive and I think a drone would be too weird to the animals. I think it might freak them out.
Yeah.
So I don't think they will allow that. So we were ready to leave, and the sun's going down. It's getting really dark, and if you recall, I said we parked in a really muddy area. The Jeep stopped in a muddy area. So now it's time to go, and the Jeep is stuck. And so it's getting darker and darker. And, so the women had to get off the Jeep, and the men had to kind of help raise up the Jeep and, stick grass under there to kind of get it to go. Because we know that it's just not the mother lion and the cubs that are around. So we push it, and we see this guy. And so he walks by the Jeep, and he lets out the loudest roar. I mean, it was so loud, it actually shook the Jeep. It was just incredible to experience this guy so close and to have a little bit of an adventure. The ladies were a little bit worried for our guys, but the guys, I think, were having a really good time out there. And the next day we're ready to go, and we're waiting for the plane to kind of pick us up on the runway, and there's an elephant there. Do you see this guy right here? And so Odie is kind of like banging on the side of the Jeep trying to get him to move. So now we're headed to Namibia. And like I mentioned before, this was the main draw for us. This was the main reason we wanted to go to Africa. And the Namib Desert is the oldest desert in the world. And the dunes are very red, and that the red is caused by iron oxide. So the redder the dunes, the older the dunes. Oh, and these are called fairy circles. This is really interesting. So no one has been able to explain what these are exactly. So some people, so what it is, it's a short shrubby grass that grows in that circle, but nothing grows inside of it. And so they've done tons of tests. Some scientists thought, oh, maybe it's termites, but then they tested the soil, they never found termites. Then they thought, oh, maybe it's an electromagnetic field, but there were never any evidence that they could find of that. And then of course, my favorite theory is that it's aliens. So let's go with that. Let's pretend this was made by aliens. And this is Hoodia Lodge, truly one of the most beautiful, really romantic. I mean, if you're planning a honeymoon or a proposal or a special anniversary, this is such a beautiful, magical place to go. And to be greeted by that smile, usually there were cocktails involved in the greeting as well as a cool towel. And the hotel, it's owned by a husband and wife, and they decorated every inch of it themselves. And it's just stuff they picked up on their travels through Africa. It's just really, really beautiful. Oh, and when we were in Botswana, our friend Marion said, oh, when you go to Hoodia Lodge, you're going to see a lion in the mountain every day. And we're like, what? We're going to see a lion in the mountain every day? She said, yeah, you're going to see a lion in the mountain every day. And so sure enough, right around 4 o'clock, the sun would hit this mountain in just a particular way that you would get this lion face. So he kind of looks like the lion from the Wizard of Oz. Like here's his eye, here's his nose, and here's his mouth. So that's pretty cool. And this is a sundowner Hoodia style. So they, on our first night there, they had this all laid out for us, a Persian carpet on the ground, our favorite cocktails, lots of food, and we just got to sit there and just enjoy the silence. You can't even imagine how quiet it is out there. And just this gentle breeze was blowing and the sun was setting. It was just incredible. And then the reason why we brought our tripod was to do some night photography. And the skies are so clear in Namibia that you could see the core of the Milky Way with the naked eye. We could see exactly where it was. And so we wanted to kind of show it over our tent. That's our lodging. So what we did, so this is where that tripod comes in, because this is a long exposure. This is probably a 10 or 13 second exposure.
Actually, it's 17.
17. Thank you, Nick.
You're welcome.
Nick knows everything. He's like the Wizard of Oz. He's magical. And so we had a tripod set up. And so Larry is on the porch, hidden behind this little fence, and he's flicking the porch light on for just a split second. And I have my little flashlight that I brought, and I'm kind of, painting all of this with the flashlight. So during that long exposure, I have, the lens is open, I guess you could say. So it's open and it's taking in all this information. So I have all this time to kind of come in here with my flashlights from behind the camera, and I'm just kind of shining it to create this exposure. And so what's great about digital is you can kind of see right away if you've got it or not, or if your painting is splotchy, or if your exposure is good. So it makes it a little bit easier to do this kind of photography. The trickiest thing I think about doing this is focusing, because it's dark and you don't want to, you kind of want to focus and then lock in your focus and then make your exposure. But because we had a little bit of contrast between, we had things to focus on, like I could focus on these reeds, I could focus on this. So this made it a little bit easier. But that's kind of the trickiest thing to do, is the focus. But I urge you to try this. And there are lots of tutorials on YouTube on how to determine your exposure and how to do this kind of photography. If you have an opportunity to be somewhere where the sky is this spectacular, go for it, because it's really fun. All right, so where near Hoodia, where we were, there's this place called Soosisvlei, which I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and Deadvlei. So it's part of this national park, this huge national park. And Soosisvlei is where you see those beautiful red dunes. And Deadvlei is that area where you see those petrified trees that kind of come up out of this clay earth. So we were really excited to photograph that. So the night before, we're talking to our guide, and he's explaining to us the itinerary of what's going to happen the next day, because he's going to take us to these places. So it's us and another couple. And so he's saying, well, first we're going to go see the desert animals. He's going to go take us on like a little safari of desert wildlife. And then we're going to go to Dead Flay, and then we're going to go to Sesrium Canyon. So the way he had scheduled the day, we were going to go to Susse's Flay and Dead Flay, the two main places we wanted to go to, in the middle of the afternoon, like noon or 1 o'clock, the worst possible time to be there. So we asked him, well, could we please do that first, do the Dead Flay and the Susse's Flay first, and then do the animals, and then do the canyon. It's like, well, I don't know. I've never done it that way before, and we have another couple. Let me check with them and see if it's okay with them. So he did, and luckily they said yes, they were on board. So that's the way it went down, thank God. So I urge you to have these conversations, and if you know there's a place you really need to be at a certain time, either make sure you do that beforehand, unlike us, who just assumed we were going to be brought there at the right time, which was foolish of us, or have that conversation with whoever is going to take you if you're on a tour, and ask if you can kind of rearrange things so that you're there when you need to be there. So the tricky thing about that, though, was the gates to the park opened at, let's say 7 a.m. So we had to be there right when the gates opened, because then we still had to drive through the park to get to where the dead trees were. So we're driving along, and the sun's coming up, and we're starting to see, this. But we can't stop because we already asked the guy to please bring us to this place at the specific time, which he's already accommodating us. So we can't say, oh, can you now stop so we can take pictures? So we took all of these pictures from the moving van on a bumpy road through the window of the van with our long lenses. So we cranked up the ISO because I knew there was a lot of bumping and jumping. My camera was really moving. So I wanted to shoot at a really high shutter speed, and just shot out the window. And it was just like one spectacular scene after another. And this is exactly what I had envisioned, because this only happens either really early in the morning or really late in the afternoon, when the sun is kind of raking across the side and creating these dramatic shadows. And I was astonished when I got these home that these were actually halfway decent and halfway sharp, because this was literally taken on the fly, a super bumpy car ride right out of the window. And that's Dead Flay. So that little area you see here in the middle, which actually looked kind of small in person. I expected it to be more vast. But what this is, these trees are like 900 years old. And they've been dead for over 300 years. And they've survived in this clay soil for 200 years. So even after the soil dried up and it became clay, they still managed to live for 200 years. I mean, that's just incredible. And the clay is what eventually killed them, because of course the clay suffocated their roots. But so they're kind of like these petrified, fossilized trees that if you get them in the right time of day, really early or really late, you just get these incredible swaths of color. Just, the shadows cast on these dunes and across the clay in the foreground. I mean, it's just absolutely magical. And the other good thing about being there in May was there were very few other tourists. There were a handful of people there, but there weren't, just busloads of people just kind of getting in the way. And this, Nick, I wanted to point out to your viewers, and I'm sure they already utilize this feature, but to think about using the panoramic feature on your smartphone. To me, this is my favorite feature of the phone. I think it just does such a magnificent job of, with one swipe of your camera across the scene, you can get these really expansive, beautiful photos. And you can kind of see in the sky, oops, a little bit kind of where the seaming happened here. But pretty much other than that, for a phone, I think this is pretty flawless that they're able to kind of stitch these different scenes together to create these panoramics. And this is Big Daddy, the biggest sand dune. And there were a ton of people climbing it. I'm glad to say I was not one of them, but I did enjoy photographing people as they were on them. And the oryx, the beautiful, beautiful oryx. And this animal is reported to be where the unicorn comes from. Like they think this is the origin of the whole unicorn myth. And our guide was telling us that just a week before, he'd had a Japanese tourist on his tour, this guy who came from Japan, and he said the only thing he wanted to see in Africa was an oryx. That's the only reason why he came. And wouldn't you believe, the entire time he was there, he never saw an oryx. So another instance of where you cannot go in with expectations. You're not going to a zoo. You're going to where there are real animals, or maybe they might be there, they might not be there. So please don't go in with a must-see list. But we saw them all over the place. In fact, when we stopped for our picnic, there was one just hanging out right next to us in the shade of a tree next to us. So this is the safari of the desert animals. And this is the small five. Yeah, the small five. So there's the big five and then the small five. And so this is a spider's lair. And so she's called the White Lady. And she builds this nest in the sand. And at the front of the nest is a long tube that kind of goes back and it ends in like a bell shape. So during the heat of the day, she's hanging out back there in that bell-shaped area, just sleeping and hanging out. But at night or at dusk, when the other critters come out, she'll come towards the front, and she can hear the vibration or feel the vibration of the animals kind of walking around in front of her little lair. So she pops out of a trap door and grabs them and eats them. And so this is her web. And apparently the Teflon vests, I think that's what they're called, Teflon, that they make the bulletproof vests out of, the weaving of that was designed on the weaving of this particular web because it's so finely meshed and so strong that they use this as their design inspiration. And that's her, that's the White Lady. She's big, she's probably the size of, I don't know, her body was like 2/4 put together and then some big long legs. She's a big girl. And then he taught us to look for snake tracks, which we got to see one, super cute. And then here, he's searching for scorpions. So he's trying to dig out some scorpions. And while we appreciated his efforts, he, on our count, did not have to go to that much effort to show us scorpions. We would have been good without seeing them. And this is how you cool down in the desert, Hoodia style. And just a scene of just the beautiful colors that the desert presents you, just amazing at every turn. And did you guys know that female ostriches have brown feathers and male ostriches have black feathers? And so here's our lunch, here's our picnic lunch under this beautiful acacia tree. And they don't do things in half measures at Hoodia, so we had beautiful crystal, amazing wines. He's going to set up this whole display of buffet foods for us. Truly magical, magical experience. And I included this just to remind us as photographers to have photos of ourselves in our albums and in our travel photos. I don't know a single photographer who loves to be photographed. We all usually have to be dragged to the front of the cameras, kicking and screaming. And I'm certainly that type of person. But of late, I've started to get over myself a little bit and just realize that I'm not present in any of these pictures. My husband and I have traveled to these amazing places, and I have lots of pictures of him, but there are no pictures of me. So my new resolution is to start including myself in more pictures, and I urge you to do the same. And we also had a hand washing station with deliciously scented soaps and lotions. And yeah, just the thing that I think struck me and surprised me and delighted me the most about this trip was the whole convivial aspect of it, the whole social aspect. You're with like-minded people who love travel, who love animals, who love nature. And it doesn't matter what country you're from or what your political background might be, you're kind of coming together on this common ground in this beautiful place and making these amazing memories and creating these great friends. We're friends with Nico and Tamara as well. It's just a lovely, lovely aspect of traveling like this. And here we have the restroom. So we had everything we needed right close by. It's perfect. And Namibia was not to be outdone in the sunset department. It was truly, truly spectacular. And this is our second attempt. The second night we attempted to do some more night photography. And this was a little bit trickier because, it was harder for my husband to stay still. Like I did some exposures where actually, Nick, I think you know the exposure on this. I think it was around 10 seconds.
No, it's actually double that, 20 seconds.
Wow, 20 seconds. Okay, so I'm impressed that Larry was able to stand that still. Because we did a few seconds longer and all of those were all blurry. But for 20 seconds, like I just I could see that he was shaking a little bit. So I kept diminishing and diminishing the exposure until I found one where he could actually hold still for that long. And it's funny, I showed this photo to my little niece, Isabella. She was 4 at the time when I showed her this photo. And she's really into magical things. She loves unicorns and princesses and fairies and anything magical she loves. So I thought, okay, I'm going to blow her mind. So I show her this photo and I say, hey, Isabella, look, Uncle Larry's holding a star. And she takes one look at it and she doesn't miss a beat. She says, "That's not a star, that's a flashlight." So that kid cannot be tricked into anything. And so here is an example of setting a transition photo for your viewer if you're doing an album or a slideshow. Like here, in a very literal way in this case, you're telling the viewer, now I am in this place. So we've left this place and now we're here. So the viewer has a narrative, it has a storyline to follow. So think about that if you're planning on doing something like that, of creating these little telltale images that really kind of spell out where you might be. It doesn't have to be as literal as this, but think about utilizing that in your photography. And this was the view from our hotel balcony. We stayed at the Victoria and Alfred Hotel right on the waterfront. And I urge you when you travel to pick your hotel in a place that's easy to get to good things to photograph. You know, oftentimes my husband and I will try to stay outside of like where all the tourists are, because we don't want to like deal with the crowds, and it's usually less expensive. But we're always kind of missing out on sunrise photos. And to me, sunrise has an entirely different, beautiful quality than sunset. Like here, this is literally, I'm hanging out my window shooting these pictures. I didn't even have to leave. I didn't have to put pajamas on or take my pajamas off. I could just shoot right out the window. And where sunset gets a lot of the credit for being like the great time of day to shoot, if sunset is the standing ovation to a performance, I think sunrise is kind of like the behind the scenes section of the performance. You know, you're watching the actors get ready. You're watching the city kind of come to life. You know, people are out working. People are out kind of getting the city ready for the tourists to kind of see the polished side. So I urge you to kind of get out in the morning. And I'm not a morning person. It's hard for me to get up in the morning. But if your hotel is already positioned somewhere where you don't have to make much of an effort to get out and start shooting that early, I say go for it. So we had tickets to Table Mountain, and our trip pretty much included everything. It included all our meals, all the tours, everything was kind of included, which was really nice. And part of that was the trip to Table Mountain, which is, you know, this beautiful place that you can go and see the whole of the city. But it's usually very foggy and it's usually very windy. So we got really lucky that we had a clear morning. So we hightailed it up to Table Mountain. And the cable cars are, they're designed and maintained by the Swiss. So every 2 years, they close it down for 2 weeks and the Swiss come in and they fix it and they maintain it and they make sure it runs perfectly. And this kind of bottom part here, Nick, you can see like the bottom of the cable car, it's actually it's actually hollow under there. And they use that for storage. So they use that to store, you know, to carry the water up to the top, because there's a restaurant up there, and all the food and all the supplies for the gift shop. So their only mode of getting things up there, transporting, is in the bottom of that cable car. So as tourists, we're standing on top and we don't realize there's like a whole other section under there where all the stuff is being transported up and down the mountain. And from up there, you get 360 views of Cape Town. It's just absolutely spectacular. And there's lots of hiking trails up there, so you could spend truly an entire day just hanging out. Then that afternoon, we went to Robben Island, which was one of the highlights, I think, for both of us, for my husband and me. And this place has been a leper colony. It's been an insane asylum, and of course, a maximum security prison, and where Nelson Mandela spent 18 years imprisoned. And this quarry was one of the punishments they would give the prisoners. And the prisoners were kind of broken up into different classes. So the most dangerous prisoners were the political prisoners, the Nelson Mandelas. They were the A group. And they were isolated from everyone else. They were isolated from each other. And they were given the hardest labor to do. The murderers and the rapists were in the B group. And they had much more freedom and much more liberty than the A group. So this quarry, originally the prisoners were sent there to extract the rock, to use it to build a road. But that happened within 6 weeks. They did it, they built it, it was done. But the guards realized, hey, this is like a really good punishment place. So let's just have them keep working in the quarry, even if we don't need the rock. Let's just keep them out there just to torture them. So they would go out there, and because the light was so bright and it would just kind of glare off this white rock, a lot of them went blind. And Nelson Mandela actually lost the ability to cry. His tear ducts dried up. But what the guards didn't realize was that the prisoners actually did love this duty, because this hole here, this cave, was their restroom. And that was the one place where the guards did not go. They did not supervise them in there. So the older prisoners, they had this motto called each one, teach one. So they would take the younger prisoners in there and they would teach them. They would use that as an opportunity to teach them. Some of them didn't know how to read, or they would teach them about philosophy or about theology. They would get a chance to converse and to kind of share ideas. So unbeknownst to the guards, they actually really looked forward to this duty and they were doing some good. They were taking this horrible situation and they were creating something good and something beautiful out of it. So this is where the murderers and the rapists would be. So they would sleep like 25 to a room, and these little mats were their beds. So they had these, that's what they slept on, these tiny little mats. And the prison guards are all former, I'm sorry, the guides are all former prisoners. So this man, I think he was in high school, he was arrested for protesting. And so he spent time here, he did time here. And what he's holding is a menu. And depending on your color, you would get either one type of food or another, or one quantity of food versus another. So the whole system, of just that segregation between color and all that was so ingrained in everything, including even how they treated the prisoners. And this is kind of a typical letter that, if you sent a letter to someone in there, they would just go in there and censor the living daylights out of it. So, half of your letters would be kind of just blocked out like this. And you weren't allowed a lot of letters at a time. I think maybe once every couple of months you were allowed a letter or a visitor. And this garden is where Nelson Mandela would kind of sneak out here, or not sneak out here, but when he was out here, he would sneakily write his autobiography and then he would hide the pages in the garden. So every day that he came out here, he would write a little bit more and just kind of hide away the pages. And this was his cell. And so Cape Town is an incredibly vibrant city, a lot of great restaurants, a lot of great street performances and artists. I mean, truly a beautiful, beautiful place to visit. And I wanted to kind of talk about this photo, Nick, because I wanted to talk to your students or to your viewers about something that I just mentioned to my students last week. I was teaching them about photographing people when you travel.
Yes.
And how important it is to kind of try to make a connection with them before you just start shooting. So in this case, I wasn't really able to talk to them because they were performing, obviously. But before I even started shooting, I just spent some time listening to them play and, kind of tapping my foot, maybe dancing a little bit, smiling, just making kind of eye contact and just letting them know that I was really appreciating the performance and them as artists, and that I didn't just want to swoop in, take some photos and just kind of take off. And I think that's why I was able to get this reaction from her. Like she and I had like a little bit of a moment and a little bit of a connection, because I really did show my appreciation in an authentic and genuine way. So I urge people to do that when they're traveling, to really show an interest. And if it's someone you can talk to, strike up a conversation. You might really get some great intel on where to go for a great meal, or you might even make a friend. So don't just treat the people like they're part of the scenery. Really connect, show interest, and really be present in them and show interest in them.
Those are great points, and I totally agree.
Yeah.
I actually have a question from Ethan. So without prying too much on price, approximately full boat, the whole trip, what price range?
I'll tell you the whole thing. Like I know it's probably not couth to talk about money, but I'll tell you guys straight up what we paid. So when we were doing the research, we were thinking just land was going to be about 20 grand. That's what we were kind of thinking was going to kind of come to. But then when we talked to our travel agent, he got us the entire trip, including the airfare, for 20 grand. So that included airfare from DC to Johannesburg, all the lodging, all the tours, most of the meals. I think we only maybe paid for 5 meals on our own. Everything was included. And I know that's a lot of money, but if you were to spend 3 weeks in Europe, at the quality of the level of lodge that we stayed at, the hotels were all 3 and 4 star. The meals were all incredible. I've never eaten so well on a vacation. You would easily spend probably double that. So I think it's very reasonably priced. And when you're there, the dollar goes a long way. I mean, the meals were very reasonable and the cocktails were very reasonable. Everything was really, really reasonable. And they really, really, really want us to travel. I don't think we spent a day where somebody didn't tell us, oh, please tell your friends to come and visit. Please tell everybody to come and visit us. They're really reliant on us traveling there. and boosting up their tourism economy. So I'm happy to share that.
Great, thank you.
So then we take a tour. We're driving along, Cape Town, and we end up in the little penguin colony, which was really cool. It was really fun. Unfortunately, you can't get that close to the penguins, at least where we were, but it was so neat to see, lions one day, and then a couple of days later, here you are looking at penguins. And this shot, I had seen this branch, and I liked seeing the penguins in the grass because it just seemed so incongruent to me. So I see this branch, and I'm thinking, oh, it'd be so cool if a penguin would just kind of like walk under there, and then like his head would kind of mimic the shape of the branch. So I waited for a few minutes, and I like to think that I used my telepathic powers to make this happen, and it did. So maybe it worked, but I think I just got lucky. So another kind of lesson: if you see something, just hang out and wait and see what happens. Something really cool might kind of come together for you.
Isabel, so the folks that are on here that are my students, that's actually a familiar story for them. And it's like, when you get lucky, be ready.
Exactly.
Yes.
Be ready. Yeah.
Yep.
So this is St. James, and I think I had seen pictures or a video of something of the ferry onto Robben Island, and I thought it just looked so cool. So here we're with a guide. She's driving us around, and I told her about this place, and she said, "Oh yeah, I know that place, but it's a little bit of a rough neighborhood, but we'll go there." So if you guys do go there, just be aware that it is a little bit of a dodgier neighborhood, and so you may not want to be there alone with a lot of flashy camera equipment. But it was a really cool place. It was really beautiful. I'm really glad we went. And the other thing I was telling my students the other day was to not be afraid to approach people and ask them to pose for you. But if you do that, you need to be really prepared before you even ask them to do it. So really have your location really locked down, have your lighting locked down, make sure you know what camera settings you're going to use, have everything ready. And then or even practice on your spouse or your kid first to make sure that what you're doing is going to be good and solid. And then once you get all that worked out, then you can approach the person and say, "Hey, I love what you're wearing," or "I think you have a great look. I think you'd be a great model for this photo I want to take. It will only take a minute," because you've already done all the kind of pre-production work. You've already worked everything out. It'll only take a minute. Can you please just come and take this photo for me or pose for me? And you'd be surprised at how often people will say yes. And if you are confident, and if you're doing so, with authority and with confidence, you're not stumbling and fumbling, so they're not losing confidence in you and think that you don't know what you're doing, you can get like a really nice kind of interaction with them and a nice expression like this. So I often do this. In fact, in my day-to-day life, to find models for my portrait work, I will ask people just straight up, can I take your picture? I have this great idea. Would you model for me? And they almost always say yes. So give it a try, but be prepared. And this photo, I love this photo. This was shot from the car. And there's an expression, I think it's called Ubuntu. I could be wrong about this, but basically it means kind of an all for one for all kind of thing. Like whatever you have, you share it. We're all in this together kind of thing. And this photo really epitomizes that for me. They have one bike and 3 friends. What do? You make it work. You figure it out and you make it work. And I love that about the people here. And so this is wine country in Cape Town, incredibly beautiful, incredibly affluent area, amazing restaurants, amazing wineries. And so our plan originally was our guide was going to take us to these wineries and we were just going to drink wine all day, I guess. But so we started like 10:30 in the morning drinking wine. And Larry and I are not huge, we like wine, but we're not huge drinkers. And after that 1 or 2 wineries, we were kind of done. So our guide's trying to think of things to do with us for the rest of the day. And she said, we had lunch in this place. This is where Elton John stays when he comes to Cape Town, this hotel. And so she's trying to find things for us to do. And she's thinking, well, there's a car museum. Maybe we can go there. I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. So we're driving towards the car museum and we drive by this area. And so we say, well, what is that? And she says, well, that's called a township. And it's these little communities that kind of pop up, kind of homeless people, I guess you would call them displaced people. And they just kind of build these little communities in their homes out of whatever they can find, whether it's corrugated metal or tarps or whatever. And so we asked our guide, well, would it be possible to like bring them some food and just kind of talk to them and just maybe take some pictures? And she said, well, I'm not sure how safe it's going to be, but let's go to the grocery store. We'll pick up some supplies. At the very minimum, we'll just drop them off. And if it's not safe, we've done a good deed and we can go on our way. We said, great. So that's what we did. We went to the grocery store. We came back and, everybody kind of gathered. And she's asking them, is it okay if we just kind of come and meet you guys and talk to you and take some pictures? And they were amazingly receptive to it. And I asked this woman, can I take your portrait? And she said yes, but then she went and she grabbed her baby. She wanted a portrait of her with her baby. And I was just so struck, first of all, how beautiful she is. Here's this incredibly beautiful woman under different circumstances. She could be a model or an actress. And it was just so amazing to be able to show her or to let her see the way that I see her, to kind of shine that spotlight on her and make her feel special and make her feel that she's worthy of being photographed. It was really a very profound and deep experience for us. And we truly spent most of the time there just talking to them. We didn't even raise our cameras to our faces until we'd been there for at least 20 minutes, just kind of talking to them, asking them about themselves. They asked us about us, how we live, where we live. So we had some really lovely conversations with them. And then whenever I would ask, oh, do you want me to take your portrait? They always said yes. And they were always just so thrilled and just so happy to comply and to be a part of it, to be part of this kind of creative give and take and this just lovely moment together. And this is Liha, and she became like my little shadow. Like wherever I went, she was always there. And she was just very interested in me and a little bit shy, but always wanted to be in all the photos. She was just so cute.
So we have another question for you from Alona, and she wants to know, on your street portraits, do you promise to share the photographs with the people you shoot?
I do.
Do you share them?
I do. Yeah, this is actually a little bit of a sad situation for us because we did promise them that we were going to make portraits. We were going to send them the prints because a lot of them said, oh, I've never not even had my picture taken. I've never had an actual portrait. So we said, well, we are going to send you the portraits. So we asked our guide, if we send you the prints, can you please bring them back to them? And she said, absolutely, no problem. I want to come and bring them some more supplies anyway. So yeah, mail me the photos and I will bring them to them. So we thought, oh, great, that's amazing. So we made all these promises to them that we were going to give them these photos. So we get back here and we, unfortunately, we gave her our information, but she didn't give us her information. So we get back here and we're waiting to hear from her, and we never hear a word. So then my husband gets he gets a little bit detective-y. So first of all, we called the tour company and tried to get her information, but they wouldn't release her name or information. And then we remember her saying that she did charity work at a temple or at a church. So we contacted them, explaining why we want to get in touch with her, but we never heard back from them either. So we've never been able to bring them the photos or get them photos. So the only way to do that is we're going to have to just go back there and deliver them ourselves. But it's just been killing us that we haven't made good on this promise, because you always want to do that. If you promise someone something like this, you have to deliver, you have to make good on it. So that is kind of killing us a little bit. So yeah, here's our portrait that we made. So here they were just kind of cooking and they were just, we were just kind of hanging out. They were cooking, they were talking with us. It was just very, very natural and very lovely. Made some portraits of them together, showing us around. They were really very open and very eager to show us all over their little town, their township. And this man, I think he's like the mayor of it. I mean, we had to get his permission to be here. And he was just really funny, really smart, a really lovely guy. I really enjoyed spending time with him and making this portrait of him. And this little girl apparently is very, very well in school. She's very bright, and she has all of her awards very neatly and very proudly displayed in this little binder. So she wanted to show Larry her awards. And by the end of the trip, I was seeing giraffes everywhere, and it was great. And so that's it. So this is the longest I've ever talked in my entire life. So I am done.
Well, that was wonderful, Isabel.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for Isabel? Any additional questions? You can just pop them up in the chat real quick. We'll kind of wait. I don't see anything coming up. So Isabel, we really, really appreciate it. It was a wonderful presentation. And we got Yep. So people is coming through, and I'll save these chats for you.
Okay.
Fantastic presentation. That was wonderful. This was so interesting and beautiful. So lots of great comments, and I'll share those with you when we.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, if anyone wants to email me, you can find me through the websites here, or on Instagram, Facebook. I'm pretty active on Instagram, a little bit more than Facebook. But yeah, please reach out. Any other questions or anything you think of, please let me know.
Well, thank you, Isabel. We really appreciate it, and Larry for sharing all the pictures and the stories. I'm sure everybody really enjoyed it, and everybody who attended tonight, thank you so much. We actually recorded, so we'll make the recording available so that you can go back in and look at some of the information that Isabel provided earlier. So thank you, Isabel.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Yeah, and thank you, everybody. We'll catch you later.